Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post, and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's Monday night in India, and we are back with another episode of Vantage, stories from around the world that impact us and shape our present and future. This weekend, we saw a lot of developments in Australia. Indians came under attack there. We look at the Khalistan movement and why it's been given space in some of these countries. Closer home, another day in the life of Pakistan, another blast, this one in a mosque, and a blast in Iran that could trigger another war, Iran versus Israel. Tensions are high. On target is Iran's nuclear facility. This was a drone attack, and it complicates an already very complicated situation in West Asia. We'll connect the dots to see the big picture. Plus our special series, Advantage India. We'll start with the headlines. Deadly blast inside a mosque in Peshawar. Multiple casualties reported, more than 100 people injured. Security in the capital city of Islamabad has been stepped up. For the first time, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that Ankara could accept Finland into the NATO without its Nordic neighbour Sweden. President Vladimir Putin of Russia threatened to target me with a missile attack, says former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Kremlin has denied the claim. As China faces a looming population crisis, Sichuan province announces it will lift its 3-childbirth limit and remove restrictions on single parents. And will artificial intelligence kill Google? The founder of Gmail thinks popular computer program ChatGPT will destroy the search engine Google. Our lead story tonight comes from Australia, from the city of Melbourne. Indians came under attack in the city. This happened on Sunday. Pro-Khalistani groups attacked Indians carrying the national flag. Take a look at this. The images clearly show that the attack was unprovoked. The attackers were waving the Khalistani flag. Some of them were also carrying rods and swords and chanting "Death to India." The incident took place near Federation Square in Melbourne. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Khalistan movement is a separatist movement. They want the Indian state of Punjab to become a separate country. This demand has been made through violent attacks, both in India and outside. And in Australia, pro-Khalistani groups were holding a referendum with a predictable question. Should Punjab in India become an independent country? When Indians carrying the tricolour showed up, they were attacked. The police had to intervene. In fact, the Indian High Commission in Canberra had feared this. Khalistani referendums have been planned in Melbourne and Sydney. On Republic Day, the Indian High Commission, in fact, issued a statement. It urged Australia to ensure the safety of Indians during these referendums. Let me quote from the Indian Mission statement. These incidents are clear attempts to sow hatred and division among the peaceful, multi-faith and multicultural Indian-Australian community. Sunday's incident has gone viral on social media, but it's not an isolated one. In the last few weeks, 3 Hindu temples have been vandalized in Australia. The walls of these temples were defaced with pro-Khalistani and anti-India slogans. On the 12th of January, the Swami Narayan temple in the Mill Park area of Melbourne was desecrated. On the 16th, the historic Sri Shiva Vishnu temple in Carrum Downs, Victoria, was vandalized. And on the 23rd of this month, the ISKCON temple in Albert Park, Melbourne, was defaced. Authorities of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON, have expressed concern. India has raised the matter with the government of Australia. And this is becoming a disturbing pattern. Similar attacks have been seen in other countries like Canada and Britain. In October last year, a pro-Khalistani group clashed with Indian supporters in Brampton, Canada. This was during Diwali celebrations at a mall. Around 500 people had gathered there for the celebration. The Khalistanis waved their yellow flag and shouted, "Khalistan Zindabad." The Indians responded with the chant of Jai Shri Ram. Same story in Britain. Khalistanis attacked a group of British Indians outside the Indian High Commission in London. This incident is from March 2019. Similar scenes were reported during India's Independence Day celebrations. And this raises questions about who is supporting these groups. How do they operate and attack Indians with impunity in these countries? Who is funding them? Who is leading them? What is the origin of this movement? Like I said, it's a Sikh separatist movement. It wants to create a sovereign state called Khalistan, or the land of the Khalsa, a state for the Sikhs, comprising Punjab in India and Punjab in Pakistan, with Lahore as its capital. Jagjit Singh Chauhan was the founder of this movement. He established the Council of Khalistan at Anandpur Sahib in April 1980. At its peak in the mid-1990s, the Khalistan movement was one of India's most violent insurgencies. It claimed more than 21,000 lives. Khalistan 1.0 found strong support in the Sikh community in Canada, the US, and the UK. What we see now is the second avatar of this movement. And this too is backed by a part of the Sikh diaspora. They extend logistical support to keep this issue alive, to keep this movement alive. Their propaganda relies heavily on Operation Blue Star. A dark and difficult period for India. Terrorists led by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala took over the Golden Temple in Amritsar. It's the holiest site for Sikhs. India launched a military operation to flush them out. Bhindranwale was killed. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated. Anti-Sikh riots followed, and years of violence and bloodshed. India may have killed the Khalistan movement, but it's rising again in the West. In countries like Canada, pro-Khalistani groups and leaders have growing political clout. In Britain, ISI-backed anti-India groups operate freely. And now we see these attacks in Australia. India's partners must rise to the occasion and walk the talk on combating all forms of terror. To West Asia now, which is bracing for yet another war. Iran versus Israel. They've been old foes. Both have vowed to wipe the other out of existence. And now they're firing more than verbal missiles. An explosion has shaken up Tehran. This happened 24 hours back. It looks like a minor blast, but it's not. It's a drone strike, a strike allegedly conducted by Israel. Israel has not taken responsibility, but multiple reports confirm that this was an Israeli drone attack, almost an act of war. You fly a drone behind enemy lines, and that too with the intent to strike. This qualifies as an act of war. No lives were lost in the explosion. The casualty was the oil market. Prices of Brent shot up earlier today. The flare-up comes at a complicated time for Iran and for Israel. Iran has been dealing with domestic protests and a nuclear deal that is stuck. Israel is exchanging fire with Hamas and has suffered an attack on a synagogue just a couple of days back. So what explains this latest escalation? On Vantage tonight, we'll bring you the backstory to connect the dots. Let's go back to that video from Iran first, the explosion. It happened in the city of Isfahan. It is located in central Iran. It's the third largest city in the country. The explosion happened on the top of a building. It is believed to be a munitions factory, and it's right next to a site that belongs to Iran's Space Research Center. The US has sanctioned this research center. America says the center is involved in Iran's ballistic missile program. So the site of the explosion was a sensitive one, and the plan was ambitious. Israel is said to have sent 3 quadcopters to target this factory. A quadcopter is basically a type of a combat drone. 3 of these flew into Isfahan. 1 was shot down by Iran's air defenses. The other 2 exploded above the factory. The blast tore the roof, but no other damage has been reported.
جاری که شنیده شد از صدایی بود که پدافند اون ریز پرنده رو مورد اصابت قرار داد. مردم در ابتدا مقدار نگران شده بودند ولی الحمدلله اطلاع رسانی به موقع و سریع.
Iran's foreign minister has called it a cowardly strike. I have a statement with me. This is what he said. Such actions cannot impact the determination and intent of our experts for peaceful nuclear progress. He was asked if this blast is going to impact Iran's nuclear program. This is what he said. So this is what we know about the blast. Now to the question of timing. Why is it happening now? There's a new government in Israel, a government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has a record of sanctioning daring military operations against Iran. Netanyahu is said to be pursuing the same policy now. But what about his partners? What about Israel's partners in Washington, D.C.? Where do they stand on this? They've been trying to strike a nuclear deal with Iran. No progress there. Earlier this month, the U.S. And this was their largest military exercise to date, the U.S. and Israel. The drill went on for 4 days. Thousands of troops from both sides were involved. The soldiers fired more than 180,000 pounds of live munitions. What's the message that they're trying to send? Listen to what Israel's new military chief has said about it. When someone attacks you, the best defense is to attack him back. So it is offensive capabilities, and we shape it in order to bring a very clear message to Iran. If Iran makes mistakes, offensive capabilities are getting ready. This is the message from Israel, and it's not just military drills. Intelligence cooperation is also deepening between the two sides. CIA Director William Burns was in Tel Aviv last week. It was a surprise visit. He's said to have discussed Iran and other issues. And this week, another top American official will be in Israel, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Again, Iran is on the agenda. Do you see the recalibration here? Why is Team Biden warming up to Israel again? Two reasons. Number one, the Iran nuclear deal. The US president wanted to revive the deal, but as of today, the talks are dead. The negotiations remain stalled, and Iran has ramped up uranium enrichment. Reports say Tehran now has enough uranium to build several nuclear bombs. So the US is back to playing war games with Israel to build pressure on Iran. Reason number two, Iran's deepening ties with Russia. Tehran has been supplying weapons to Russian forces in Ukraine. Needless to say, Washington does not like it.
With respect to economic pressure, for deciding to go down a road where their weapons are being used to kill civilians in Ukraine and to try to plunge cities into cold and darkness, which, from our point of view, puts Iran in a place where it could potentially be contributing to widespread war crimes.
New flashpoints are emerging in West Asia. The actions of Israel and America are raising the risk of conflict. Already tensions are rising between Iran and Azerbaijan. They're neighbors, and they don't get along well. Last Friday, the Azerbaijan embassy in Tehran was attacked. A gunman stormed the diplomatic mission. He killed the security chief and wounded 2 others. Apparently, Baku had issued repeated warnings to Tehran. It said the embassy was at risk, yet the attack happened. And now the mission has been closed. Azerbaijan has evacuated the diplomatic staff and their families. It is calling this a terrorist attack.
As a ministry, we demand from the Iranian side to bring the perpetrators of this terrorist act into justice as soon as possible, since Iran, as a side who accept the embassies, has an obligation, according to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, to secure and to provide the safety of the embassies. And the embassy security obligation is directly lies on Iranian shoulders.
Tehran says the attacker was driven by personal motives. Baku says this claim is absurd. Iran says the attack will not hurt relations, but it's clear that Azerbaijan has been moving closer to Israel. And Iran has backed Armenia in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. It sounds very complicated because it is. This relationship is strained, and this region is a powder keg. And Iran has been firefighting at home too. It has been rocked by protests and violent crackdowns. There is a serious shortage of food, fuel, medicines, and other essentials. And to make things worse, there was an earthquake over the weekend. 3 people died, hundreds were injured. Like they say, when it rains, it pours. For Iran, the challenges are multiplying by the day. A military conflict is the last thing it would want. But the same holds true for its regional and international adversaries. Another war would only mean bad news. And speaking of bad news, here's what we have from Pakistan. A blast took place in Peshawar today. This was in a mosque packed with people. Multiple casualties have been reported, including police officers who had gathered for daily prayers. Many people have been injured. Officials say that a portion of the building collapsed. Several people were trapped under it. Reports say that a suicide bomber carried out this attack. Peshawar is located in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, bordering Afghanistan. This is the second such attack in less than a year. In March last year, another mosque was attacked. Again, a suicide bomber. 64 people were killed then. We've been tracking developments in the aftermath of today's attack. Here's the latest. It's a bloodbath when it comes to the economy too. Fuel prices in Pakistan have touched a record high. The government has increased prices by 35 Pakistani rupees per litre for petrol and diesel. This comes a week after the entire country was plunged in darkness due to Pakistan's biggest ever power outage. People in Pakistan will now have to pay almost 250 rupees for 1 litre of petrol. Almost 263 rupees for 1 litre of high-speed diesel, 190 rupees for 1 litre of kerosene, and 187 rupees for 1 litre of light diesel. Why did the country take this decision? Pakistan's Finance Minister Ishaq Dar says prices have been hiked after reports of artificial shortages and hoarding of fuel in anticipation of a rise. He said in the last 4 months, there was no increase in petrol prices and prices of diesel and kerosene, in fact, decreased. This comes after Pakistan experienced a nationwide outage. Millions of people went without electricity. All major cities, including Islamabad, Lahore and Karachi, experienced power cuts. The Energy Minister said this happened due to quote-unquote reduced frequency in the national grid. The impact was massive. The outage caused major disruption. Hospitals had to use backup power generators. Many people were left without drinking water. The situation was so bad that Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had to apologize to the people of his country. This was the second major power outage in 4 months. Here's a question. When you're short of money and unable to make ends meet, what do? The sensible thing is to limit expenditure to only essential goods. But Pakistan is doing the exact opposite. The country is splurging on luxury cars in the middle of an economic crisis. The government has allowed the import of 2,200 luxury vehicles. This will be done in the first 6 months of the current fiscal year. Pakistan has given a reason for it. It says that almost 8,500 containers carrying important products are held at ports. These products include consumer goods, industrial goods, pharmaceuticals, and perishable items. More than 95% of these containers have been held. At a time like this, the import of used luxury cars is being cleared at ports. And Pakistan has spent hundreds of billions of rupees to import these vehicles. Just to remind you, this is happening at a time when people are not being able to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, protests continue for all kinds of reasons. A few days ago, a Danish-Swedish politician burned the Quran in Stockholm. Protests erupted in Pakistan. Around 12,000 people turned up on the streets of Lahore. These were members of Pakistan's Tehreek-e-Labbaik party. Its head, Saad Rizvi, urged the government to lodge a strong protest against Sweden. Hurt religious sentiments threatened to derail Sweden's NATO bid, and Pakistan's reaction is a classic case of misplaced priorities and misplaced anger. Some protesters burned Switzerland's flag, confusing it with Sweden's. Amid all of this, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari arrived in Moscow. to meet his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Earlier this month, Russia's energy minister visited Islamabad. Bilateral economic and trade relations were discussed. The larger focus was on oil and gas. Russia is looking to provide oil to Pakistan. But who will pay for it? That's a story for another day. And now it's time for Advantage India. It's a special series on the rising stature of India. Today we'll talk about the economy. Every second headline mentions recession. The world is staring at one, but India has emerged as a bright spot. And in the weeks and months ahead, India is expected to be the driver of global economy. As we gear up for the annual budget, here's a look at how India has beaten the global trend. Meet Gareth Thomas. He's a member of the British Parliament. He wants school students in the UK to be taught Indian languages like Gujarati, Bengali, Punjabi and Urdu. A British MP wants students to learn Indian languages. Do you know why? So that they can engage with India. He wants them to be able to engage with India because he says India will be the next economic powerhouse.
Given the global significance of the Indian economy in years to come, it seems even sadder that we are seeing a decline in the teaching of languages of modern India in Gujarati, Bengali, Persian, Punjabi and Urdu. If we want to take as a country the full benefit of the trade deal that we're hoping to see done with India going forward, actually having people who can speak the languages of that great country.
And it's not just politicians. Economic experts are also optimistic. Here's what a top UN economist said recently. India is a bright spot in the world economy. This is the assessment of Hamid Rashid. He works at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations. His confidence in India stems from two reasons. Number one is inflation. India is being able to control it. And number two, low import bills, especially when it comes to energy. New Delhi has managed expenses carefully. Prime Minister Modi spoke about it recently.
Friends, the IMF sees India as a bright spot in the global economy. The World Bank says that India is in a better position to deal with global headwinds than many other countries.
Agencies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank endorse India. And the contrast with the rest of the world is stark. The global economy is in a slump. The war in Ukraine is fueling fears of recession. China is unable to shake off the Wuhan virus. The United States is barreling towards a government shutdown. The United Kingdom faces the worst recession in the G7. The Japanese economy shrank last year. But here's the projection for India. The World Bank says the Indian economy has demonstrated resilience despite a challenging environment. So what makes India stand out? How did it become an exception to the global slump? A few factors have worked to India's advantage. First of all, the strong pandemic recovery. There were no major lockdowns last year. Economic activity resumed and remained largely uninterrupted. For the West, the war in Ukraine dealt a huge blow, but India was able to absorb the shock. And this was thanks to India's domestic consumption, private or household consumption. It makes up about 60% of India's GDP, 60% of the GDP. The money you and I spend drives growth. And this spending has been on the rise. It has helped the economy. So next time you joke that you're shopping to help the economy, you're not wrong. Last month, India's tax collections also jumped. This is GST we're talking about, the goods and services tax. The collection went up by 15%. How much money are we talking about here? A little over $18 billion. Why is rising tax collection significant? Because it means strong economic activity. So that's one thing that is working in favor of India. The second one is decoupling from China. The world is doing it. Businesses are deleveraging, meaning they're building alternatives. They're implementing what they call a China +1 strategy. Meaning if you have a Chinese partner, you'll engage with them, but you'll also cultivate a non-Chinese company, a non-Chinese partner. That's the China +1 strategy. You see, the world is actively diversifying its supply chains, and there are compelling reasons to do this. The authoritarianism of Xi Jinping, the frequent crackdowns on business owners in China, erratic policies, trade wars, a shrinking workforce. China is becoming more unreliable by the day, so global businesses are shifting away, and all of this is helping India. I have some examples. Last year, Apple started making its new iPhones in India. Apple engages with many manufacturers to make the iPhone, and these companies are looking to expand their operations in India. More than a dozen such companies are ready to divert production from China. Then we have Samsung, another smartphone giant. It makes 120 million units every year. 120 million in India every year. Tech giant Google is also considering the switch. Semiconductor manufacturers are eyeing India. Taiwan's Foxconn has joined hands with India's Vedanta. They've announced a joint venture. They want to set up semiconductor plants in India. Chip makers from Taiwan are also looking to work with India. I could go on, but you get the picture. India is emerging as the go-to destination for global businesses. And this is not to say that there are no hiccups, but the trend looks promising. The third factor is domestic investment. Some of India's biggest conglomerates are pumping money into key sectors. They're being lured by government subsidies. New Delhi is encouraging manufacturing in 14 key industries. The list includes electronics, drones, drugs, and batteries. Companies are taking advantage of these opportunities. They're helping India sustain a high level of growth. Here's an assessment by Morgan Stanley. It's an investment management company, and this is what it says. India is on track to become the world's third largest economy by 2027. This is an assessment by Morgan Stanley. India could surpass Japan and Germany in 4 years. This report makes a forecast. It says India will have the world's third largest stock market by 2030. This is thanks to investments being made in technology and energy. S&P Global has a similar assessment. It says India will overtake Japan and Germany, and that Indian households will become the greatest spenders among the G20. In fact, India's G20 presidency this year can open up fresh opportunities for the economy. But there are things that India needs to watch out for. What are the risks? First is the fiscal deficit. That's the difference between expenses and earnings. When a government spends more than it earns, it ends up with a budget deficit. What is India's fiscal deficit right now? A little over 6%. That's according to one estimate. And there is a need to bring that down. Expenses need to be watched closely. The second risk is, of course, the global uncertainty. The war in Ukraine is far from over. Western powers want to pressurize Russia. They want to cap Moscow's earnings from oil. India is going to have to be cautious about all of this, about any attempts to cut supplies, because that would adversely impact India's energy procurements. And despite all of this, a lot is going well for the Indian economy. Connect the dots, and you'll see that it is indeed Advantage India. And now to a developing story from India. The Supreme Court is at war with the government. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the country. Its judges want to appoint other judges. The government says this is not okay, that there's no transparency or accountability in this process. But why should you care about any of this? It sounds too complicated anyway. Well, I'll tell you why. Look at some court orders that have made headlines in the recent past. Homosexuality, Ram Mandir, live-in relationships, spectrum allocation, freedom of expression. These are just 5 examples. They tell you one thing. The court weighs in on every aspect of your life. The judges rule on all matters that impact you. That's how powerful they are. It's not for nothing that the judiciary is called one of the pillars of democracy. They perform a very, very important function, checking the powers of the government. But who is checking the powers of the courts? This is what the debate is all about. Can judges alone pick judges? Should the government have a say? How much of a say? Will it hurt the independence of the judiciary? How do other countries appoint judges? In the next few minutes, that's what we'll discuss. First, let me ask you a few more questions. What happens when your local MP or MLA does not perform? You vote them out. What happens when your team member does not deliver? You demand accountability. In extreme cases, you fire them. But what happens when justice is not delivered? You cannot question a judge. That would amount to contempt of court. You can appeal in a higher court. You can seek reviews, but you cannot demand accountability. You have to trust that the lordships are unbiased and that they're upholding the law. This is what the Law Minister of India says.
जज तो एक बार जज बन गए तो उनको तो चुनाव का सामना तो करना नहीं है। जजों का तो ऐसा है कि उसको पब्लिक स्क्रूटनी भी नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो इसीलिए मैंने कहा कि जितने जो जजेस होते हैं, आप जनता आपको नहीं चुनते हैं, इसलिए जनता आपको बदल नहीं सकते हैं, लेकिन आपको जनता देख रहा है।
Citizens are watching judges. They don't have to face elections. They face no public scrutiny. These are Law Minister Kiran Rijiju's words. Some judges share this opinion. Some call the system opaque. Others call it unconstitutional. To understand why, it's important to understand how judges are appointed in India through a group called a collegium. It has 5 members, the Chief Justice of India and 4 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court. Now, these 5 people take calls on the appointment and transfer of judges. And this has been the system for almost 30 years. But it's not part of the Constitution. There is no specific law that dictates the functioning of this collegium, this group of 5 judges. It's a system that has evolved over the years through a series of court judgments. So basically, the judges decided how they will be appointed, and that became the process. Now let's tell you how the collegium works. Actually, there's very little that we know because it's a closed-door affair. The meetings are not announced in advance. There is no official mechanism or secretariat. The judges can meet when they want. And when they do, it is a private affair. So it won't be wrong to say that the process of appointment of judges is opaque. Does the government have no role? Well, it does, but it's a limited role. Their first task is inquiry. This happens when a lawyer is elevated to the position of a judge. The Intelligence Bureau or the IB does the background checks. And task number 2 is the appointment of a judge. The government does not have much room to maneuver. It can raise objections. It can seek clarifications about certain names, but ultimately it has to go with what the judges say. So judges have a near monopoly on the appointment of other judges. And this power comes with barely any scrutiny. Where is the scope for accountability? There is none. Again, these are not my words. This is the assessment of Justice J. Chelameshwar. He was a Supreme Court judge till June 2018, and he has always spoken against this system. A few years back, the government suggested an alternative. It was called the NJAC, the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC. The Supreme Court scrapped it. And that decision, the court's decision, was taken by a bench of 5 judges. 4 of them were against the new system. The 5th one was in favor of it. Justice Chelameshwar was that 5th dissenting judge. Let me quote from what he said then. This is what he said about the collegium system. The records are absolutely beyond the reach of any person, including the judges of this court, who are not lucky enough to become the Chief Justice of India. Such a state of affairs does not either enhance the credibility of the institution or does good for the people of this country. Transparency is a vital factor in constitutional governance. The need for transparency is more in the case of an appointment process. That was Justice Chelameshwar's view. Another judge, Justice Kurian Joseph, was also on that same bench, the one that struck down the government's proposal for a new system. In 2015, Justice Joseph had backed the process of judges picking judges. But now he regrets his stand. This is what he said in 2019 after his retirement, and I'm quoting again, how to improve the collegium system. Nothing has been done. The only improvement is that the resolutions are uploaded. That is why I regret my NJAC judgment. None of the suggestions for the improvement of the collegium system was implemented. I even wrote a letter. Again, these are the opinions of the judges. They're now questioning the system themselves. And here's something else that you should know. This happens in no other country. In India, the standoff between the government and the top court continues. It is taking a toll on the justice system. The Supreme Court of India has 27 judges as of today. 27. It should have 34. That is the sanctioned strength. So the top court is short of 7 judges. In the high courts, more than 100 posts are yet to be filled. The collegium has sent a list of names. The government is yet to process them. And the standoff is worsening the backlog in courts. More than 40 million cases are pending in India, 40 million pending. More than 70,000 cases are pending in the Supreme Court alone. The supporters of the collegium system say that it ensures the independence of the judiciary. Yes, the government should not be allowed undue interference in the judicial process. But neither can the courts be given unchecked powers. Because as they say, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. India's courts have been the bedrock of India's democracy. They have been the beacon of hope in the dark days of emergency. To maintain the credibility of an institution that rules on matters concerning 1.4 billion Indians, the judiciary, with all due respect, should open itself up to scrutiny. This is a story about how the United States of America upholds human rights and civil liberties, how it ensures the safety of its citizens. Watch this.
I know you were there, but you didn't listen. That's for me. My stomach hurts.
'Rodney King' in 1991, 'George Floyd' in 2020, 'Tyre Nichols' in 2023. Three men of different generations, all of them victims of police brutality, all of them in America. It's one horror story playing on loop. Cops in the US continue to terrorize citizens. The latest assault is from the city of Memphis. We have the images, and let me warn you, they're graphic and disturbing.
You get your ass blown the Get the cup. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your around. All right. I'm on the ground. Lay down. Lay down. Yes, sir. Lay down. Lay down. I'm tasing. All right, okay. Turn your bitch ass right back. Break your ass the fuck out. You guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down. I'm just trying to go home. Lay down. Man, if you don't lay down. Oh, I am on the ground. Put your hand on your stomach. I got it. Okay. Get the fuck back. Stop. I'm not doing it. Oh, shit.
5 police officers tasered, pepper sprayed, and brutally assaulted Tyre Nichols. He was 29 years old. He had a job and a son. He was African American. He did not survive. After 3 days in hospital, Tyre Nichols died. What about the cops? They've been charged with second-degree murder. And what about the president? What is he doing to curb police brutality in the US? He's giving sound bites. The US president says the image of America is at stake.
With the nation watching this videotape and what could happen, what is at stake?
What's at stake is, first of all, innocent people's lives, number one. Number two, it has a lot to say and do with the image of America.
Little has changed in the US since George Floyd was killed by the police. In fact, it's getting worse. Deaths from police brutality and violence are at a 10-year high. 1,186. That is the number of Americans killed by their police in 2022. Last year, 1,186. 26% of these were African Americans. They make up just 13% of America's population, but double the number of people who die at the hands of cops. This is the worst for any community in the US. So there's racism and more. What these numbers tell you is this: police brutality is an epidemic in the US. Use of force and disproportionate force is the go-to response of the cops. Look at any protest site in the US. Police units turn up in riot gear and assault weapons.
Why are you in riot gear? I don't see no riot gear. Why are you in riot gear? I don't see no riot gear. Why are you in riot gear? I don't see no riot gear. Why are you in riot gear?
These are cops. They look like soldiers. How did America's police get militarized? The story begins in the 1980s, the Reagan years. The US had a serious drug problem. President Reagan declared a war.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
One of the solutions offered to tackle the drug problem was this: get the US military to work with the police. Laws were passed to facilitate this. They also launched something called the 1033 program. What is 1033? It's a weapons transfer program. Under this, the arms meant for the US military are transferred to the police. Now, these are surplus arms, leftover weapons. So police get these military-grade weapons for free. What kind of weapons are these? Armored vehicles, rifles, mine-resistant vehicles, body armor, even aircraft. Look at these, 40-ton mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. These were built for American troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, and now they're being used by the police in America. Do cops really need all of this? Do they need tactical vehicles on duty? Do American roads have landmines? It makes no sense for a police force to have weapons like these, but in America they do. And they've had such weapons for years. The 1033 program has been around since 1991. By the year 2020, military equipment worth over $7 billion had been transferred. $7 billion. Who got these weapons? About 8,200 police departments in America. This includes cops whose job is to protect school districts. They get military-grade defense equipment around schools. I have a case study. In 2014, the Los Angeles Unified School District Police received weapons. These weapons: one mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, 3 grenade launchers, and dozens of semi-automatic assault rifles. Why did the police have to have grenade launchers to protect schools? There was massive public outcry. Under pressure, the cops had to return the grenade launchers, but they kept the rest. And these weapons are now being used. This is what I mean when I say disproportionate force. This is what leads to police brutality, among other things. Areas with more military gear are witnessing more police killings. Military gear is being used to execute routine warrants and raids. From 1980 to 2018, more than 30,000 people have died due to police violence in the US. And here is the most damning indictment. Police in the United States kill far more people than police in other advanced industrial democracies. The pattern is quite clear. More weapons for the cops are leading to more civilian deaths. And in a lot of ways, this problem is linked to America's gun culture. Most Americans live near a gun store. Many of them can buy a gun in less than an hour. Deadly weapons end up in the hands of those who should not be allowed to own a gun in the first place. So how do the police deal with this? By carrying even more lethal weapons. It's a vicious cycle. And it shows how broken the American system is. Gun terror is killing people, police brutality is killing people, and president after president stands helpless before this gun lobby. This is the story of America's paramilitary police. Novak Djokovic just won his 10th Australian Open. He now has 22 Grand Slams, same as Rafael Nadal, the highest ever in the history of men's tennis. He is also back to being the world #1, a position he has held for a record 373 weeks. Now, if you're a tennis fan, you already know these facts, and more perhaps. Tonight, I'm not going to talk about his tennis or his greatness. That is well documented. I want to talk about the grit that led to this greatness. How a young boy from war-torn Serbia came to rule the tennis world. How he made his name in an era dominated by Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Djokovic had a tough childhood. It was his training ground, you could say. He says those hardships instilled in him a fighting spirit. Today, he's famous for that spirit. Today, he earns millions of dollars and is among the richest tennis players in the world. But there was a time when his family did not even have a single euro. This is what he said last year in Turin, and I'm quoting from what he said. I went through a difficult childhood, and I know what it means to have €0 in a family of 5 people. Let's not forget where I come from and that my childhood was marked by war. I believe that everything that I have earned has been done with the sweat of my brow. Novak Djokovic was born in 1987 in Serbia. His childhood was a turbulent one. In those years, Serbia was a part of Yugoslavia. The country saw a violent disintegration. The Republic of Serbia, as we know it today, was formed only in the year 2006. A young Djokovic saw brutal military action, civil strife, ethnic cleansing. Many people were killed then. Those who survived were forced to flee. Djokovic has talked about all of this. When he was 12 years old, he hid in the shelter of his grandfather's apartment along with his family. This was during the bombing of Belgrade in 1999. Let me quote from what he said. "We would come to this building every single night because our building did not have a shelter. People would just hide in corners and try to find a safe place. It was a horrifying experience for everyone." Well, that was then. Today, his life is very different. Today, Novak Djokovic can have anything that he wants. But there was a time when he had to queue up to get water. He says, and I'm quoting again, "My upbringing was in Serbia during several wars during the 1990s. It was a difficult time where we had to wait in line for bread, milk, water, and other basic things in life." On the tennis court, Djokovic is known for his mental strength and his never give up attitude, even when the odds are stacked against him. But then he had learned at a very young age how to beat the odds and survive, and these early life lessons have stood him in good stead in his career. Initially, these experiences also made him very bitter. He says he learned how to channelize that anger to his advantage. "I use that anger in a way that fuels me to be successful in tennis," he said. When he started this tennis career, he was a prankster, overshadowed in an era of great rivalry, the one between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. He was always good, but not as great as the other two. Few thought that one day he will not just challenge them, but also break their records.
I think there's still a lot of that fire inside of me that is burning of passion for the sport and for competition, and I think that's what allows me to still push myself to the limit also in the practice sessions and day in, day out after so many years to go through same routines repetitively that sometimes is not so interesting, I would say, but I know that there is always a greater goal and a guiding star, so to say, and this trophy is one of those guiding stars, is something that I always strive to achieve.
His journey has been about survival, about adapting and changing course, which is exactly what he did in the year 2010. That's when he switched to a gluten-free diet. He was having way too many physical breakdowns in matches. Then a doctor told him it could be a wheat allergy. He dropped gluten from his diet. It led to a massive transformation in his game and stamina, and the rest, as they say, is history. It sounds easy, but imagine the kind of discipline this takes. And why are we discussing his diet and his history? To see the sweat behind the glory. A boy from war-torn Serbia overcame his difficult childhood to achieve phenomenal success. The talent and trophies are there for the world to see, but only a few know of the trauma and the tears, and the years of struggle that fueled this champion. The grit behind the glamour is often overlooked, because many would like to believe that superstars are born. The truth is, most superstars are made, not born. When was the last time you sucked your cheeks in to highlight your cheekbones? If you're a woman, you must know all about the pout. Apparently, it's such a big deal that people are buying one. It's the new craze in town. It's called buccal fat removal. It's yet another face-altering technique, a kind of cosmetic surgery where fat is extracted from the cheeks. Well, how does it help? It gives you the appearance of ultra-contoured, sharper cheekbones. How much does it cost? In terms of money, anywhere between $2,500 to $20,000 US. It's a wide range. The cost depends on where you get it done. And how much downtime? 1 week tops. That's how long you take to return to normal social activity after the surgery. How long does the procedure take? 1 hour. It's relatively non-invasive and increasingly popular thanks to some celebrity endorsement. Chrissy Teigen is an American model. She's had her buccal fat removed. She's the only celebrity who has admitted to undergoing this procedure, but she's hardly the only one. Because buccal fat removal is quite in, just like the cheeks of several celebs. And this trick is not new, it's been around for decades. So why is it picking up now? Because of our definition of beauty. It keeps evolving and shaping trends. Every time a female beauty standard is created and achieved, the very goalpost is shifted and something new catches on. Earlier it was larger breasts, plumper lips, even fuller eyebrows. Now it is cheek contouring. It begins with angled makeup and ends with cosmetic surgery. Add social media in the mix and it becomes a trend. Look at the viral Instagram reels and TikToks talking about buccal surgery. They're all the rage. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, the answer depends on how much you let it affect you. Wanting to look good is perfectly fine, I guess. But chasing someone else's definition of beauty may be problematic. As soon as we create new female body trends, those who don't follow them tend to feel left out, and those who do are labeled people pleasers, seeking validation from strangers. There's no way to win this, it seems. What's worse, trying to achieve these standards can have lifelong ramifications. So the buccal fat removal surgery might work for you when you're young, but what happens as the years go by? The cheek muscle becomes thin, the bones wear out, and because your face has no buccal fat support, it starts appearing loose, almost hollow. The surgery itself is considered safe, but there is a list of possible complications like damage to salivary glands or facial nerves, cardiac or pulmonary side effects, blood clotting, accumulation of fluid under your skin, even facial asymmetry. You know what they say about beauty? It's only skin deep. But what about the deeper scars that beauty trends can leave on women? The price of beauty is high. As women grapple with the push and pull of fashion trends, it seems they cannot win, even with a perfectly contoured face. And finally, it's time to wrap up with Vantage shots, images that tell the story. The first month of this year has not even come to a close. Yet protests are already on the rise worldwide. Millions are marching through the streets, demanding justice against challenges of political division, economic and social unrest, and climate change, among others. Although every context is unique, waves of protests remind us that people are angry for multiple reasons, and they're unafraid to speak up. Here's a look at some of the biggest protest movements around the world as we speak. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
לא תחליטו אם נעשה הקלות או לא.